Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Theodore, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Theodore was a promising young tug from a small harbor up the coast when he first pootered into port. Bright-eyed and bushy-bumpered.
And here we are with our main character of the series, Theodore, a young tug who is sent to come and work in the big harbor. Upon his arrival, he notices that the big harbor is a lot bigger and noisier than his old harbor. Despite all these new changes being thrown at him all at once, Theodore can't wait to start work, and he hurries to the great ocean dock to find the dispatcher.
The dispatcher was the one who gave the tugs their jobs. "Theodore Tugboat reporting for duty, sir," he announced. The dispatcher turned around, but he didn't see where the voice was coming from. Said Theodore. Then the dispatcher looked down a little and saw Theodore. "Who did you say you were?" "Oh, yes, Theodore. Yes, a little smaller than we expected."
Wow, that's a bit of a low blow, don't you think? Theodore's only been here for how many minutes, and you're already questioning his size. You know, just because he's small doesn't mean he can't be a useful tugboat.
Anyway, after all the introductions, Theodore is eager to start work right away, but the dispatcher informs him there is no work for him at that very moment. And he suggests that maybe Theodore go and have a look around. Theodore does happily agree, but on his journey, well, what do you think he sees next?
Two boats going back and forth, toot-tooting to each other all the while. "Are you lost?" said Theodore. "We're not," tooted one of the boats, whose name was Philip. "Lost," tooted the other, whose name was Fillmore.
Oh, hi, Diesel 10.
"Well, then why are you going back and forth like that?" "Because we're ferries," they both tooted at once. Theodore giggled at the boats. "Then you must be toot fairies," he said.
Seriously, Theodore? You don't know what a ferry is? Bruh, you need to get out more.
Well, wherever Theodore comes from, you kinda have to give him a little slack. I mean, he's a young tug and he's got a lot to learn. But anyway, after his encounter with the fairies, this wasn't exactly the only surprise Theodore was to run into.
"Who are you, little putt-putt?" He looked up to see it was a bridge. "Who are you?" replied Theodore. "Why, I'm Benjamin B. Bridge." "Well, I'm Theodore T. Tugboat, and I'm not a putt-putt. I'm a puller. The best ship-pulling tug around."
Why was Benjamin portrayed as a in season 1? Why this of all episodes when afterwards he was completely nice?
I have no idea. But after all that, Theodore tries to find a dock to rest, only leading him to question which one is his. As if things weren't bad enough, Theodore's thoughts are broken by a new face that we're about to meet.
"My name is Hank. What's yours?" "Theodore," replied Theodore. "Do you want to see the sandy beach?" asked Hank. "It's really nice."
Is anybody getting any Thomas and Percy vibes from these two?
Thomas and Percy, best friends you'll see. Thomas and Percy, best friends you'll see. Thomas and Percy, blue and green, best of friends that you've ever seen.
They certainly are. So Hank offers to share his part of the dock, and Theodore agrees, much to his dismay. He then worries about all these new things again, but tries to stay positive knowing he'll be working the next day. And before I continue, I have to point out, what is this?
It says they're asleep, but they're not. Who's gonna fall for that?
I really don't know. So the following day, the dispatcher does tell Theodore that he has a job for him, and much as this is going to be a big surprise to Theodore, we're about to meet another brand new face.
This is George. Follow him. You'll be working with him all this morning. Theodore turned and saw another tugboat. In fact, he was the biggest tugboat Theodore had ever seen. His big double engines went vroom, vroom, and his huge smokestack blew up an entire cloud of smoke.
It's my boy! Yes! Yes! I'm not fanboying. You are.
Okay. So, after all that, George and Theodore meet up with Pearl the pilot boat to move a ship out of the harbor. As Theodore goes to button on in front, George roars past as if he's going to pull in front. As much as Theodore disapproves of this, he argues with Pearl that he is indeed a puller, but not exactly to what Pearl expected.
Have you ever pulled a really big ship like this before? Theodore stared up at the great cargo ship. He swallowed once and said, "Well, no, ma'am, not exactly this big, but I have pulled barges." "George is the puller on this job," said Pearl.
Wow, that sucks. Not getting your way really hurts, don't it?
Yeah, it does. So after the tugs are done moving the ship, Theodore starts to think about how much he misses his old home and all of his friends. Thoughts are broken once again when, oh look, another new face we're about to meet.
Theodore saw Emily, and she was heading out to the open ocean. A tugboat can't go on the ocean, thought Theodore. She'll get lost or caught in a big storm. He began to whistle. Stop! Stop!
Oh, Theodore. You definitely have so much to learn the further we get into the series.
Oh, yes he does. So Theodore pulls Emily back to the dock, and then he tries to explain what happened. Due to all the confusion, the dispatcher calmly explains to Theodore why Emily is allowed to leave the harbor.
The dispatcher explained that tugs who had their V words like Emily the Vigorous and George the Valiant could go out on the ocean. Theodore looked at the bright gold names on Emily and George, so that's why they were there.
And after all of that, Theodore starts to wonder what his V word might one day be, and then also notices that Hank doesn't have a V name.
"I guess we could never be V's," he said. "Sure we could," replied Hank. "Emily was just a harbor tug like us once. But you have to learn lots of things before you get your V," continued Hank. "Like pulling ships here in the big harbor." "But there are so many new things to learn," said Theodore. "I'll never do it."
Never say never, Theodore. Just take some time.
Exactly.
"We could go practice right now." "No," he said finally. And then he said, "There's lots of time to practice later. But now I'd really like to go look at that sandy beach with you." Well, Hank smiled his sunniest smile. "It's right over there," he shouted. "Just follow me." And with that, he led the way with a merry toot-toot. And somehow, on that day, the big harbor seemed just a little bit, well, not so big to Theodore, and a little more like home.
And that is the end of Theodore and the Big Harbor. What did you think about this episode, David?
At the end of the day, as much as I want to say that this was a very good episode, I can't help but feel like this was one of the moderate episodes for me. Yes, I do enjoy this, but the reason it's so low for me is because this was the 20th episode of the first season, when it literally should have been the very first. People aren't going to recognize this as the first episode.
Well, overall, I think it's a pretty good way to start off the series. I think my only gripe with this episode can probably be said by lots of other fans. Why exactly was Theodore brought to the Big Harbor? And what harbor specifically does he come from? Did the company buy him? Was there a trade deal? These are some of the many questions that may never be answered. But in any case, story-wise it was really good, as it does show how much change can be difficult to certain individuals. And we're already introduced to a great number of promising characters, like Theodore, Hank, Emily, George, and so on. I can't wait to see how much these characters really develop throughout the series. Up next is Theodore and the Homesick Rowboat.